Today we're going to be talking about creatine, one of the most researched supplements there is, that's cheap and has a number of benefits. So should you be taking it? Well, based on what I just said, it might seem like a bit of a no-brainer. But if you were anything like I was growing up, you might have been scared off creatine under the illusion that it's one step away from the steroids camp and back to the nothing but whey protein you went. But let's take a look at why creatine is a supplement that you should be taking. So what is creatine? Well, creatine is a substance that is found naturally in our muscle cells and helps our body produce more of a molecule known as adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. Now, ATP is known as the body's energy currency. So in simple terms, what creatine is doing is helping our muscles produce more energy. And by helping our muscles produce more energy, creatine can therefore help with strength and performance, can aid in building lean muscle mass through increasing our power output and workload capacity, and it can help reduce fatigue. There's also been a number of recent studies that have shown that creatine can have cognitive benefits too. And I don't know about you, but anything that can improve my brain function is certainly something that I am interested in. Now, creatine is something that we do get naturally through our diet, but it would be very difficult to get anywhere near enough creatine through our diet alone, which is where the use of creatine as a supplement comes in. Now, before you start worrying too much about draining your bank account with yet another supplement, fear not, because creatine is cheap. In fact, it's very cheap. I take this creatine monohydrate from Optimum Nutrition, which cost me $18.95 from Amazon, and it contains 93 servings worth. Now, I usually take about 1 3/4 servings, which means that I get about 53 days worth of creatine at a price of 36p a day from that container alone. And yes, I did just work that all out of my head. So before you go and spend £15,000 on that home red light sauna and ice bath, you might just want to take that money and buy a lifetime supply of creatine instead, which is probably going to have much more benefits for you long term. It's also worth noting that there is various types of creatine that you can buy, but creatine monohydrate is not only the cheapest, it has also been shown to be the best. But is it safe, I may hear you ask, as understandably, some of that does all sound a bit too good to be true. But a quick search through YouTube will show a number of reputable names such as Andrew Huberman, Andy Galpin, Lane Norton, Peter Attia and more, who all vouch for the use of creatine and its safety. And for a simple mind like myself, that's probably enough to go from. But for the skeptics among you, it's worth noting that creatine genuinely is one of the most researched supplements there is, and essentially been no evidence to show that creatine does cause any harm on yourself whatsoever. About the most worrying side effect that you may hear about in relation to creatine came from one 2009 study which did show a link between creatine supplements and an increase in a hormone called DHT, which can lead to hair loss. However, having looked into what people much smarter than me say, it doesn't seem that there's been any real evidence that does support that link between creatine and DHT. And my personal opinion is also that since that initial study was done back in 2009, if there was any evidence to show that link between creatine and DHT, we surely would have seen it by now. And so personally, I don't think hair loss from taking creatine is something that you do need to worry about. One word of warning though, creatine does look suspiciously like a certain class A drug. And so if you're ever thinking about going on holiday with your creatine supplement, it may be worth just thinking about some sort of excuse as to why it looks like you've got a kilo of Pablo's finest with you. You will also gain weight from taking creatine, as it will lift the water content within your muscle cells. But personally, I would just look at that as good weight that you're gaining. And my own experience with creatine was that I genuinely felt like I looked a lot leaner after only a few weeks of taking creatine. In terms of dosage, 5 grams per day tends to be the universally recommended dose. If you're a little bit smaller, you might want to take a little bit less than that. If you're a little bit on the bigger side, you might want to take a bit more. I'm currently around 195 pounds and I take 6 grams of creatine a day just to make sure that I am getting enough in. Some people also do recommend a bit of a loading phase when you first start taking creatine, which is essentially where you take a much higher dose of creatine in those first few weeks that you start taking creatine. And this would usually be something around 20 to 30 grams of creatine a day. And the idea is that in doing so, you will more quickly saturate your muscle cells. But it does seem like certain people do experience some GI issues through doing that and general feelings of nausea. And ultimately, you will adequately saturate your muscle cells through taking the 5-gram dose a day. It will probably just take a few more weeks to do so. But personally, I think unless you're a particularly impatient fucker, I would just take the 5 grams dose a day and wait a few weeks for the benefits to start kicking in. In terms of timing, there does seem to be some evidence that suggests a very tiny benefit from taking creatine immediately after your workout. So if you're one of those gimps that's got one of those protein shakers with their supplements and powders at the bottom of it, you may as well go ahead and take your creatine immediately after your workout. But ultimately, it seems that it doesn't really matter what time you take creatine. The most important thing to do is to just make sure that you are getting it in your daily. And ultimately, I would just suggest taking it whenever is most convenient for you. To sum up, creatine is one of the most researched and safest supplements there is. It helps increase your strength and performance, aids in building lean muscle mass, and it can even potentially have certain cognitive benefits too. And it's cheap as chips. So in answer to my initial question, should you be taking creatine? Absolutely. Not like that though, just put it in water and drink it like a normal person.